This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are back here in the studio for a new episode. If you've been tracking the shows most recently, we've been doing a lot of discussions around the ways of innovation and tools and methods and approaches. We've had some guests. We try to intersperse those, what I call solo shows, with guests so that you can hear kind of the practical side also. You know, it's great to have all the theory, but if you don't live it day in and day out, that experience is absolutely of huge value from actually doing it rather than just listening to it or seeing it or reading it. So today's guest is one that's actually been doing this and living this for quite some time, over their entire career. And the interesting part of this interview is that we overlap, albeit we never worked together, but have a lot of common connections. We both come from similar industries, have been involved in kind of similar things. So this is going to be, I'm pretty sure this is going to turn into a very interesting conversations, and who knows what rabbit holes we are going to run into. So before I waste any more time, let me bring on today's guest. Today's guest is Mo Kadaba. Mo is the EVP and Chief Product and Platform Officer at AT&T. Mo, thank you for joining us here on Killer Innovations.
We've been planning on doing this for almost a year now, and this little thing named COVID's gotten in the way, so it's fantastic to finally be able to do it with you.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that getting the schedule gods to align has turned out to be a lot harder than anybody could imagine. But in that time, you've actually have taken on a new role. Well, I should say an expanded role, at AT&T. But before we get into that, introduce yourself to the guests. Give us a little bit of your background that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So Mo Kadaba, as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Product and Platforms Officer at AT&T Business. And, I was born and raised in the UK. My parents actually left Iran right before the revolution in 78. And, it's one of those things that you're just incredibly thankful for every single day. My mom was quite pregnant when she arrived in the United Kingdom. And there is some nameless immigration officer that I'll never know who they are, he or she, and they looked at her and they allowed her to come into the country. And that meant that I was born and raised there. And if that one thing had turned out different, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. Yeah. And it really gives you an appreciation for everything that we have, growing up and living here and in the West, if you will. So grew up in the UK, moved to the States in 91. My parents bought some Subway sandwich stores, of all things. So I've been gainfully employed since I was 13 years old as a sandwich artist. And it taught me everything I would ever need to know about customer experience, working with customers, as well as, let's call it, product innovation. I was always about making that sandwich better and more attractive. And, you take pride in it. And as you mentioned, I've been with AT&T for almost 19 years now. So other than a short gig with another company coming out of college, I've been with AT&T my entire career. And, I always tell people, Phil, the thing that I love most about AT&T is that, you can literally do something different every single year. And you can have a 30, 35, 40-year career, and you never are going to do the same thing twice. And you're going to learn every single day of your career. Yep. And so I've done a little bit of, almost everything that we do under the sun at AT&T Communications. And that includes, managing call centers, installation repair reps. I manage construction and engineering, building out the LTE network, the last major innovation in mobility for Virginia to Maine. And then I've done spectrum acquisition modeling, long-range capital financial planning for network. I've been a product manager for cybersecurity advanced solutions, chief marketing officer, and to the point you made most recently, chief product and platform.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you and I also have a similar overlap, right? In the fact that you at 13, it's an interesting law, the fact that as a child of parents who own a business, you can be employed versus normal employment. My mom was a manager of a bowling alley. My mom was a professional bowler, in her career. So I worked from the time I was 12, 13 in a bowling alley. So if you need a Brunswick pin setter rebuilt, I'm your guy. But
Now I need to know what your high score is.
well, and what's interesting though is that it is great experience at a young age about what does work really mean, and pride and getting some recognition for doing a good job. I think was part of what got me kind of hooked, even on small business. Right, this was a small business owned by a few people, and not a big, huge money maker by any stretch of the imagination, but it was great experience at a very young age, versus just doing the paper route thing. Not that that's a bad thing, but having that experience under your belt is it does kind of give you that foundational and gives you what's the appetite, I guess is one way to say it. The other piece is you mentioned about AT&T and being able to have a full career. That's very similar to HP from the standpoint of, you're
Right.
one of 240,000 employees, and, $100 billion in revenue. You got a lot of options and a lot of those experiences. A lot of people just kind of diss the big guys like, oh, they're slow, they don't get around, they don't make changes, they don't try, anything new. But what's interesting on AT&T is its history. From the divestiture to the split up to the baby bells to then all pretty much coming back together again. Not quite all of them,
Exactly.
majority of them,
I mean,
all coming
over
back together
140
again.
years of history now.
Right.
It's an astounding legacy, but always with one eye to the future. As you
Right.
think about innovation, we have caught and sunset more S curves than anyone can imagine. Just looking at the legacy of AT&T Labs and everything that we've built and all the innovations that we've been a part of, and most recently, 5G. I know it's a topic we're going to talk about.
Well, and it is, and when you think about AT&T and you think about AT&T Labs, and AT&T was one of the first companies in the world to put as much effort as it did into a corporate research group, separate from product development and new feature sets, but truly, and in some cases, even fundamental science research. That's been a key for AT&T's legacy and culture for all those years.
That's right. Just to your point, pure R&D for the sake of advancing the knowledge of mankind has been, a core part of our history. And, I think bringing that back, that's why it's been so extraordinary to be there for almost 2 decades. I mean, just seeing the rise of multiple generations of network from, copper to fiber, from 2G to 3G to 4G, now 5G, and seeing how each one of these networks fundamentally shapes the fabric of our society, almost always exactly on kind of a 10-year cadence.
Mm-hmm.
So, with each decade has come a new platform, if you will, a new fabric, and then you see innovation flourish behind it every single time.
Well, and what's interesting from the standpoint of, look, we're in the middle of COVID. I'm at my ranch. You're where you're at in Dallas. We've kind of all have to figure out the new normal. But what's interesting is people just kind of thought of their network, right? Their voice network, their mobile network, their data network is just kind of being there until all of a sudden you're working from home, your kids are trying to learn from home, and all of a sudden people's perceptions of the investments that those investments have been for 30, 40, 50 years to lead up to be there when people most need it now.
It's well said. One of the questions I was getting a lot early on in those, kind of mid-March through mid-April is shift in traffic patterns from kind of, urban cores to widely distributed residential areas, and then broadly, how is it that the network, went off without a hitch? Like,
Yep.
how was it that people were able to shift to working from home and like no one missed a beat? The network truly delivered, and the answer is what you articulated, Phil, which is what we think of technically as capacity planning.
Right.
How do you ensure that you're always projecting X number of quarters or years ahead and building the capacity so it's there, so that when you have peak or surge traffic, you're there to capture it, whether it's voice or data.
Let's pick up that part of the conversation when we come back from this quick commercial break. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the Biz Talk Radio Network. Welcome back to Innovations. Let's continue our conversation with Mo Kadabah. Mo is the EVP, Chief Product and Platform Officer at AT&T Business. So Mo, as we were going into the commercial break, we were talking about kind of what was going on in the networks and the fact that experiences like COVID kind of opened people's eyes to the role that networks play in just our day-to-day lives, enabling work from home, school from home, etc. What were some of your experiences? What are people doing across those networks today, and where do you think that goes in the future?
Well, when you think about the killer innovation, what we jokingly said is voice is hot again. Voice, which is arguably the oldest innovation when you think about communications network, just experienced skyrocketing growth. And as well as texting, right? So if you kind of think about peak use days, it's usually Mother's Day, it's New Year's Eve, it's those sorts of moments. And in many zip codes across America, we were seeing that level of traffic almost every single day for about 2 to 3 to 4 weeks into COVID, and then it kind of settled down.
So what was the driver for that? Do you think it's just because people were a little freaked out about the COVID thing and just wanted to hear a voice because they couldn't do the social thing? Or
yeah, I think it's the compounding work and personal aspects coming together.
Right.
So obviously work shifted from central to distributed locations, but then on top of that, we are social beings. Like, we like to talk to one another. So if you're now sheltering in place, which the majority of the country was doing, you're no longer going out and seeing your friends. You're not doing happy hours. You're not doing social. You're not going shopping. So what do? You pick up the phone and now you're talking to people again, like the good old days.
Yeah, it was interesting because I actually got some calls from friends that, running small RLECs, the rural elect guys, right? And they ran into huge problems because they'd been, degrading all of their voice gear out of their network to all of a sudden they got this big, huge burst with COVID. And all of a sudden you were getting into blocking situation, call blocking, particularly 800 numbers, because all the local jurisdictions created 800 numbers to find out COVID information. So everybody's trying to jam 800 numbers to try to to call for local information, health departments or whatever, and they couldn't get their calls through. So it was kind of something everybody's thinking, okay, everything's going VoIP or whatever, but the voice traffic surprise was pretty interesting.
From our perspective, and again, being at AT&T Business, where we're serving 3 million customers across the world, it was interesting for us because this was a phenomenon that moved from east to west. So it really started in China and Asia. And as we were supporting our customers there, we essentially got a 2 to 3 week heads up on what was coming, as it then shifted into Europe and then shifted into the US. So we were actually able to work with a lot of the collaboration players, a lot of our very large enterprise customers, if you will, to ensure that they were ready in terms of the capacity that they were needing, expansion of their VPN networks, the deployment of collaboration suites, understanding that people were about to go home, and really getting in front of a lot of the challenges that you're outlining here.
Yeah, well, it was one of the interesting byproducts is so this show is sponsored by Zoom. Zoom has been a
Mm.
sponsor for almost 6 years now. Eric Ewing is the founder of Zoom, is a longtime
Yep.
friend, and we've been using Zoom since it was an alpha version. All of a sudden, Zoom, explodes with usage in the early days of COVID, and all of a sudden, we're getting all these phone calls. People listen to the show saying, "Well, would Zoom work for me? How would I use Zoom in my case? What about my, kid's school? Is it a good product for this or that?" And all of a sudden, people not even knowing a product like Zoom even exists, to now all of a sudden it's front and center, collaboration. Look, Microsoft's got great products in Teams, you got WebEx, you got Cisco Telepresence, you've got, Skype, you got all kinds of tools out there. And thank God we have those tools, because I couldn't imagine, trying to do work. You think back to, if COVID happened in the 1960s or 1970s, how do how do you collaborate,
Exactly.
without these kinds of what I call foundational innovations? I think of networks as really being a platform that others can innovate on top of, and it's such a critical technology, such a critical innovation in today's world.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, when you think back, we talked a little bit about these 10-year time horizons where the networks evolve, create new fabric, and then the innovation that follows. And, I don't think any of us would have imagined on the day that the smartphone launched and then the app stores launched, these devices were going to become the remote controls of our lives, right? That you would have access to, the near entirety of music that's ever been created, the rise of over-the-top video, and that you'd be able to watch, anything you want from anywhere. I'll tell you, every time I'm in the car, Phil, as much as I deal with innovation on a daily basis, Waze and mapping technologies still feel like magic. I'm going to drive 12 hours across the country, and it can estimate within 3 minutes, factoring in traffic patterns, when I'm going to arrive. I mean, that is incredible. And the next wave of innovation is coming with 5G.
Well, it's interesting you say remote control. It works both ways. You use the phone to remote control. Some people would argue that the phone controls us, right? It's gotten, honestly, look, right? My phone is not too far away from me, right? I'm kind of like, if it's more than an arm's length, I get a little twitchy, right? You get a little nervous, right? Because it's everything, right? It's got your entire life there.
Well, it's like anything in life. At some point, you got to know when to set it down and
Yep.
spend time with your friends, your family, your loved ones, and there's no replacing reality, if you will, and the people around you.
Yeah, well, it's also an interesting byproduct of COVID, right? Because I think, now we were talking before we start, for today's show, about a little bit of the COVID burnout, right? Because, well, you could just work yourself to death, right? Doing 8, 9, 10 hours of Zoom calls or Skype calls or whatever, and then you're just burnt out. I don't know about everybody else, but then I've kind of gotten myself into this habit of, doing the true step away, get away from it, go do something else. You've got this, my kids are, well, all three of my kids are adults. I've got 5 grandkids, right? So I get to spend time in the evening with my grandkids, albeit it's online with them, but I'm focused on them. But if you don't have that, technology is great for that enablement. But I think, at least for me, COVID has reopened the eyes to say, you got to step away. You can't operate at that kind of pace, and you need think time. And that's the whole key to innovation, is really around finding that think time. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up our conversation talking specifically about 5G. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. Continuing our conversation with Mo Kataba, EVP, Chief Product and Platform Officer at AT&T Business. So Mo, in the last segment, we were talking about our experiences of the role of networks play through the COVID, but now we have this what's happening in the future? Where do we go with not just the network, but the businesses, the industries that are going to be transformed? We're seeing a lot of change happening in today's world. Where do the networks go, and what is that going to enable? What's our future going to look like?
Well, we've talked about 5G quite a bit off and on over the course of the last few minutes. So, why don't I start there? When people think about 5G, the majority of Americans, I think they really start with speed. We've taught everyone the 2G to 3G to 4G means, hey, faster devices, fast networks, cool smartphones, etc. And speed is certainly a part of it. But when you think about it through an innovation and a business lens, both B2B as well as B2B2C, it's super important to keep in mind the other capabilities that 5G is bringing to life, which simply haven't existed before. So the first one is latency, or how quickly does the network respond to a command? And one of the promises of 5G is that it's going to drive down latency from the hundreds of milliseconds with our current cloud construct going and accessing music and experiences and video, et cetera, to sub 10 milliseconds. And when you get to under 10 milliseconds, it's really as fast as your mind is processing reality. So when you start thinking about things like AR and VR, when you start thinking about these use cases that you can bring to life that are truly real time, it will enable that. And then the other key one is, what I think of as massive connectivity, where, everyone knows Wi-Fi can connect a couple of hundred things per access point. And then with LTE, we were able to connect about 1,000 things per access point. And with 5G, the promise of 1 million things per access point. So when you start thinking about, oh my God, I can connect tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of things, whether you're in manufacturing or in healthcare or retail or entertainment, or even, just our daily lives, being outside and the interconnectedness of all things, it starts to paint a picture of this technology will truly reshape the fabric of this next decade.
Well, this gets into an interesting conversation of the network's role in innovation, right? You could argue it gets into a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? So the networks are being expanded, then that's spurring innovation to put more things onto the network. Then the networks step up, and you're doing more things with the network. Am I reading that right?
It's a good way of thinking about it, Phil. I'll tell you from, again, a business perspective, even before the first network was built, we had businesses, enterprises reaching out, wanting to have conversations about what outcomes can this technology enable. Before we started, we were talking about a little bit about innovation, and a lot of people think about innovation as that big idea, that next idea that, that moves mountains. And in many cases, innovation is about incremental steps.
Right.
How do I continue to create new end customer experiences to drive more revenue or get someone to come out to my business location? How do I think about elevating the employee experience or making it a better, safer experience for them when they're in my smart factory? Or frankly, all of us in business are measured on cost.
Right.
So how can I drive costs out? And so when you think about deploying 5G, there's also this question of the return on investment relative to the technology that you're deploying, and how can I incrementally improve my business? And that's real conversations we're having today.
Yeah, and I think this gets into a little bit, the question. One question I wanted to ask you is, given that I come from 25 years in the mobile space, now I'm in the cable industry, is a little bit of the hype thing, right? What's real when it comes to 5G versus we've seen the demos. You and I were, commenting on some of the demos we've seen with 5G over the last couple of years, even at Mobile World Congress and other, the CTIA show and other events.
Right.
What's real? What is real that people should be thinking about?
It's a great question. So let's talk about what's hype, and then let's talk about what's real. Why don't we talk about healthcare for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
So in healthcare, everyone loves the robot surgeon that's doing surgery from dozens or hundreds of miles away. And look, that's coming, but that's hype. That's not real in production in any sort of meaningful way. But we've certainly deployed real millimeter wave 5G in the healthcare locations across America, including hospitals. And so as you think about it, back to those three key things, speed, latency, and mass connectivity, the very first use case, incremental, but very important in hospitals, is how can I move around really large files more efficiently and effectively? An MRI machine, one file, 800 meg to 1 gig. How do I get that off of that MRI machine using a cellular connection and to that next doctor? So as a patient, as the customer, if you will, is moving through the hospital, it's immediately there.
Right.
The other one that's real is back to that number of connections. You think about a hospital, especially in a post-COVID world, how can I enable a safer, better environment?
Right.
Connected medicine boxes. So using 4K video, computer vision, as a sensor, if you will, I recognize that this is a doctor or nurse who has access,
Right.
and I automatically unlock. And now I can track what medicine was removed when, less breakage, less waste. I'm a doctor. I want to walk into surgery. The doors will automatically open using 4K as a video. This is a real thing. As we talk to our medical customers, we're like, what's a big problem that you have? And they're like, look, kids hate wearing the wristband, the identifier. Like, they're all about taking it off. And like, well, what about if it's a IoT bracelet that also gives you peace of mind of where that child is for both the parent as well as the hospital? And now brand it, Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman. And so they're like, cool, I'm Batman or I'm Wonder Woman. And all of this is enabled by 5G. Not necessarily because LTE couldn't handle it, but when you think about 4K, you need 5G. When you think about hundreds or thousands of connected things, you need 5G.
Yeah, you bring up some good points about the role of it playing, not in we all like the big sexy stuff, but it's in many cases the first step on the innovation path is the use of new technologies in today's, I wouldn't call them problems, but they're really opportunities to bring efficiency to people's lives, whether it be in this case a parent's life and being able not to be stressed out about their kid, or making a doctor more efficient, less time to need to go chase a file down or waiting for a file.
Exactly right. I mean, manufacturing, we're seeing the same thing. One of our earliest 5G customers was Samsung Semiconductor in Austin, Texas. And we deployed 7 use cases, to your point, to learn. Like, what's the efficacy of these 7 use cases? And they span all those areas that you talked about. The video camera to make sure that the worker has a hard hat on. If they don't, the doors don't open. In one of my many roles, I ran construction and engineering. And I'm not proud to admit that occasionally I'd forget to put my hard hat on. And it wasn't because it was intentional or I was trying to be unsafe. We're human. We err. You forget, right? And so now you can use technology to help. But I think my favorite one there is defect management. So if you're in the creation, the manufacturing business, defects is serious business, right? If I can drive down my defects per million, then that means more revenue, less waste, less stuff I have to throw away. And so if I can use 5G, edge compute, AI, right on the line as something's being created, scan that, compare it to what perfect looks like, and shut down the line within milliseconds, serious savings that offset the investment, drive that ROI we were talking about deploying 5G.
And how open I'm assuming that business customers are very open. I mean, in the conversation I've had, it all comes down to 2 things: time and money. Save me time, make my time more valuable. Money,
Exactly.
save money, help me make more money, help me to be more judicious with my money and how I spend it, etc. So this has been great. Now we're going to go into the next segment, and this is where I'm going to put you a little bit on the hot seat. What I'd like for you to think about on the commercial break here is if you could rewind the clock and go back to the start of your career, what piece of advice do you wish you had? The lesson, probably that one key lesson that you learned over your career that you wish you knew. And we're going to answer that question when we come back from this quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue our conversation with Mo You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. Welcome back to Killer Innovations as we continue our conversations with Mo Kadaba, the EVP, Chief Product and Platform Officer at AT&T Business. So Mo, you're in the hot seat. You've had a incredibly successful career. As you shared earlier, the benefits of organizations like AT&T is you could do something different every year and have a very diverse and robust career. The question I want to ask you is if you could rewind the clock back to the start of your career, everything you've learned over your 19 years, what would be that one piece of advice you wish you had at the start and why?
Well, I think it'd start with reassurance, right? Because, heading into your career, you don't really know what to expect. And so I would definitely start with, listen, it's all going to be okay. It's going to be good. And, every ending is the beginning of another chapter. And so, start there. Now, in terms of, I think what I would tell myself in terms of advice is really, it's three things. One, in everything you do, look for how do you drive step function improvement. And it doesn't matter what the business is, back to killer innovations, how do you materially change the outcomes in every job tied to whatever your core key performance indicator is, whether it's product innovation or revenue or expense management or whatever. Everybody's got a KPI. Go figure out the underpinnings of what drives that and then materially improve it. The second thing is then relative to that, you got to make sure that you're communicating how you're driving that improvement inside of the role that you're doing. Any of us can be doing amazing work, but if the people around us, the organization, the public, and again, no matter who it is, isn't aware of it, then is that ever really happening? And then the third piece is, just be a good human being. Be a good peer. Look out for the people that you work with. I've got lots of stories I can tell you offline about the advice I've gone over the years that really taught me that. But it's like, share everything you learn, share anything that you're doing so that everybody does well. And then, make sure that you're helping your boss succeed. And then at the point that you have the opportunity to become a leader, make sure that you're looking out for your teams. Make sure that you're creating a culture, back to your point of COVID and being intentional around finding time to think, to spend time with your family. Make sure that you're creating a culture that really enables those things, flexibility and balance in our work-life integration.
Well, one of the things you just mentioned was about, making sure that when you become a leader, take care of your teams. Now, in this case, if I get the story right, you just took on an expanded role, right? But somebody who used to work for you took over promotion advertising and they're now a peer to you, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, you took on a new role, but you brought somebody with you up to not just always work for you, but to actually then become effectively the peer for you.
Well, that's the goal.
Right.
I mean, for all of us, it's, how do you surround yourselves with people who are just phenomenal,
right,
that are smart, that are, that are driven, that drive outcomes, that are good humans. And then, at the end of the day, all of us, back to every end is the beginning of a new chapter.
Right.
All of us move on to the next thing at some point. And you want to make sure that, whatever team you're leaving behind has incredible leaders that can take over and continue to thrive whether you're there or not.
Yeah, and I think, that's a great piece of advice, because success comes from not, innovation particularly is a team sport.
Exactly.
The myth of the lone inventor, the myth of if it's a one-person thing, just doesn't exist in reality, right? So it really is about that team and making that team successful. And as a leader, you get the benefit of that team, but sharing that success with that team becomes important to kind of reinforce that culture of innovation.
Exactly. And COVID has only reinforced that.
Mm-hmm.
As we've all gone virtual and are using these collaboration tools, how do you make sure every person that, is on your team is fully engaged? How do you make sure that random hallway time that you used to have, how do you replicate that at the beginning or end of every meeting and understand what's going on in their family lives? And then, also what's the silver lining?
Right.
Bill, I'll tell you, this is literally the first time in my entire career I've seen my kids every single day for 6 months. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Well, and I've had friends of mine that college kids came home because when do you get to spend 6 weeks with your college kids and you're not competing with their friends?
Exactly.
Because they want to go out at night or they got a date or, but they're home for 6 weeks. It's been great. Hey, Mo, thanks for coming and spending time on the show. If people want to track what you are up to, where's the best place they can keep up with what you're doing and what your group is doing at AT&T?
Well, LinkedIn for sure.
Right.
I'm on there. I'd love to connect with more individuals that are working on innovation and interesting things. And then, as we bring out more news around what we're doing in the 5G ecosystem, we have a very steady cadence of these very interesting business-led, customer-led use cases on what we're working on. And that's one of the areas that we bring all of them to life and make sure people know about them.
Perfect. And we'll have a link over on the show notes over on Killer Innovation. So if you're driving in your car, don't get into an accident trying to write Mo's name down. Just hop over to Killer Innovations. We'll have the link. We'll get you pointed in the right direction. Mo, again, thank you very much. I know this took us a year to get put together, but I greatly appreciate you carving out some time for us.
Thank you. Worth the wait.
Thanks. So as we wrap up today's show, a couple of favors I want to ask of you. If you find the show interesting, share it with others. Let other people know about Killer Innovations. Also, if you could hop on over to wherever you get your podcast, again, give us a 5-star rating, whether it be iTunes or Google or Spotify. We're on iHeart now. So wherever you happen to listen to the show, if you're listening to us on the BizTalk Radio Network, let your local station know that you really appreciate them carrying the show. That helps us a lot, and I would appreciate it. If you've got feedback, drop me a note, phil@killerinnovations.com. That comes directly to me. And with that, thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.